Hi, this is the second video of how I broke up from an abusive relationship. The first video was how I got to the stage or the position where I realised I didn't want to be in that relationship anymore, and then how I felt so trapped and unable to get out of it, and that it was easier for me to try and fix that relationship than to end it because of how I was feeling, and I'm just going to talk about that in a second. This video is all about how I actually broke up, how I was able to overcome all of those fears, all of those issues, all of those problems, and leave that relationship. Abusive relationships are very, very easy to get into, but almost impossible to get out of, because the abuser doesn't show that abuse at the start. So you get brought into it, and then you start feeling a lot of guilt and shame, and then there's a lot of emotional, psychological abuse that keeps you there, and then the abuser always increases it. It always grows and grows and grows, and you're unable to get out of it. You feel that this person, they didn't mean it, they're a good person at heart, you need to be there for them, you need to support them, you need to help them, they're an amazing person when they're not being abusive. And you also don't, I didn't call it abuse, I didn't know it was abuse. So let me continue on with this video, as to, I knew I wanted to get out of it. I knew it wasn't healthy, I just didn't know how to. And just as a brief summary, the main things keeping me in that relationship, this was the key things that run throughout, was shame, that I was a bad person, that I was doing so many things wrong, that I was hurting the person I loved or cared about, and how could I do this to them? And if I broke up, I would be the bad person. Guilt that I was done something wrong, fear of leaving her, of what my life would be, of not being able to cope, of how angry, upset, mad she would be with me if we broke up, trying to keep her happy all the time and comfortable all the time, doing everything just to focus on her, and not about me. It was all about her and focus on her. And then lastly, her playing the victim. All the time she would play the victim, made me feel again the shame, the guilt, the fear that I'm not a good person, I've done something wrong, she's mad, she's upset with me, and it would just basically, all of those things would keep me in that relationship and basically provide this sort of iron pyramid that I couldn't get out of. That was the prison that kept me there. And it was ironic that even in the relationship, when she would threaten to leave, she would say, "I will set you free." She knew that she was abusive. She knew who she was, and I didn't understand it. I didn't know what those words meant. "I will set you free." So let me move on. So the first part is the symptoms of the escape. How I escaped, what those symptoms were, the characteristics, the starting point for me leaving that relationship. So I basically I tried to escape from her. That's the starting point. I remember let's talk about just the last month, really. But I do remember just before that, always when we had arguments or something, I would always try and escape, go to the park, drive away from her, get out of the car in the middle of a highway. It was always trying to escape. And actually, in the last month when we went on holiday, I also tried to escape on that holiday. I was sitting on my own. When we went on walks, I would walk ahead. I would isolate myself, not wanting to talk to other people. And this was actually regardless of any fights that we had or any arguments we had. I just naturally found myself unconsciously drawn to trying to escape, to trying to get away, trying to do things on my own, try and avoid her, try and stay away from her. Without any arguments, without any disagreements, I subconsciously remember just doing that, always wanting to get away. So that was the first symptom or the first characteristic of me trying to leave that relationship. The second part of me trying to leave that relationship was overcompensating. Basically, she was always threatening during that holiday to go home because she wasn't having fun anymore, and I was doing everything I could to make it more comfortable, and I was overcompensating to do that. I was upgrading the hotels. She would have a panic attack. We would stay in that place for 7 days. I would do whatever she wanted to keep her happy. And actually, that advice came from her therapist to me directly. That to keep her happy or to be happy myself, I need to do whatever kept her happy. So I was overcompensating. She was choosing all the hotels. From before we were going on public transport, now we were going in hiring cars, and then we started having our own chauffeur who would drive us around, and so that was the second part, me overcompensating to make my life easier. The third part was not being me. So I wasn't happy. I used to write a lot while I was on holiday. I wasn't writing anything. I didn't even bring a notebook with me. I knew before I even left I wasn't writing anything. I've always written while I was on holiday. I love it. I wasn't excited about any part of the holiday. I wasn't excited about anywhere that we went. I was more concerned about her and how happy she was, and if she would be mad or upset, or if I could get her to this place or that place, and I just was not me at all. So this was the other characteristic of me, withdrawing to break up. I was literally withdrawing. My mind was just stopping me from being in that relationship, from being me. As part of that, the next point was not talking. I actually got to the point where I wasn't talking at all during the day or night for 4 days in a row. I said nothing for 4 days. She would ask me questions, she would try and talk to me about this, that or the other. I would not say anything. I would say yes or no answers because of a deep fear and a knowledge. It wasn't just a fear. I knew that everything I would say would be misinterpreted and basically turned against me. How could you say this? How could you do this? I've never been treated so badly like this before by anyone. Why did you say that? Doesn't make sense. All of these terms to make me feel like I did or said or acted in an appropriate way. So I just realised the best way to keep her happy, and therefore to keep me happy and stop the arguments, her being upset, mad, etc., was just by not talking at all. So that's what I did, and I withdrew again, and that was another way that I almost sabotaged the relationship, I guess, or trying to exit it by not saying anything. The next part was unable to cope, talking to my family. I basically found myself unable to cope with anything. that was going on a holiday with all of these issues, all of these problems, trying to keep her happy, the fear, the shame, the guilt, all of this stuff. I had to call my family and talk to them about it. And I spoke to my mum, and she tried to help me and explain and provide some sort of balanced view, all that, because she didn't really know that it was abusive or how bad the abuse was. And so I was speaking to my family and trying to get help from them, and guidance from them, and support from them, without my abuser knowing. So those were basically the main things of me realizing that, or trying to break up with her, or setting that stage for breaking up with her. But fundamentally, I realized that she needed to break up with me. I was hardwired and programmed by her over the last 2 years to feel guilt, to feel shame, to feel I couldn't cope without her, to have a fear of her being the victim. For me, to feel empowered and good about any breakup, it would need to come from her. So it was her choice, and she couldn't blame me for that. So for me, I was in a position where it was easier to fix a relationship than to break up. So in order to break up, it had to come from her, it had to be her choice. And like she always said, she would need to set me free. How ironic, but that's what I needed. So I was stuck, I was in fear, I was unhappy, I was fearful, I was being torn down daily. I was not hopeful for the future. I was not excited to marry her. I was scared of having kids with her. Fundamentally, my only thing that was saving me at that point was I was still strong enough to know deep down that I was unable to move forward and to marry her until those issues were solved. Before I had timelines of breaking up, if these problems continue in 3 months' time, then we'll have to end it. If they continue in 6 months' time, we have to end it. At some point, I just accepted that I was in this relationship, and it was easier to fix it than to break up. But I knew deep down I could not propose, and that was the thing that saved me. But I suspect in time she would have worn me down, and my mind would have changed, and that last barrier would have been removed, and I would have been manipulated to remove that, and to finally accept that that was my future, and I needed to do whatever it took to stay in that relationship and to make it work. So that was me trying to get out of it, and understanding I wanted to get out of it, and how I was stuck in it. This is actually now how I was able to break up. So it actually took 2 attempts for us to break up. Remember, I couldn't break up with her. The fear, the guilt, the shame, the victim on her side, all of this was keeping me there. In my head, I was just wanting to fix it. Even though I was so unhappy and unable to talk and not myself, etc., etc. So it was almost an impossible situation, but this is how we broke up. So in the first attempt, it started when I called my family for help, and she caught me, and she was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm just talking to my family about what they've been up to." She said, "Don't be ridiculous, you've been on the phone for an hour and a half. What have you been talking about?" So then I started to make something up that, my mom had issues with something, and I was trying to help her out, and she was really upset, and I was trying to help her deal with it. Anyway, that conversation just continued and continued for hour after hour after hour in a normal abusive way that was the nature of our arguments. And she just kept wearing me down, wearing me down, wearing me down, to the point where I just went to the one thing that kept me together, which was, I cannot marry you until we solve these issues. And when I said that, even though I said it many times before, I said that, it sent her off into the most incredible rage and spiral that we ever had, to the point that she basically said that I lied to her, I misled her, I wasted her time. How could I do this to her? That it was over, and it had to be over. And basically, that was the breakup. And we were, 7 hours away from any airport, on holiday, in the most expensive resort that I've ever stayed in or paid for, and it was 5-star, it was beautiful, it was amazing, and we'd broken up in that place, in that time. And then, what did she do? The next point, she played the victim, that default. So she then slept on the floor, cried her eyes out. I did this to her. How could I be such a bad person, such a cruel person? She would hurl all sorts of abuse at me. She would actually say that abuse to me, and then say, oh look, I know I'm being really mean and cruel, but I'm going to apologize in the morning. So she knew what she was saying and how bad it was. And I was prepared. I knew that she was going to throw everything at me. I just knew that was what was going to happen, so I didn't rise to any of it. Just kept very calm, as if just letting it all pass off me, really. I was very unemotional about it. But then that victim mentality continued. I felt bad for her lying on the floor in the cold, while I was sleeping on the bed. So I tried to give her the cover, the duvet cover. I offered that she slept in the bed, I'll move on the floor, I'll go and find somewhere else to stay. But she refused, threw it off me. I can't understand you, why are you doing this? You're disgusting, get off me, stop trying to help me, leave me alone. And then she would say, I go with the driver, she's going to find her own way out of this sort of jungle, and that I basically felt so much shame and so much guilt from this situation, and that from this victim mentality. So then the next day, we agreed to go our separate ways at breakfast, and I felt really bad that, she suffers from being on a holiday, like in unusual places. We were in the middle of a jungle, there were no taxis. I didn't know how she was going to get out of there. It was, I just didn't know how to deal with it. And she refused any help playing that victim. So then she basically kept the conversation going, and it continued into the hotel room or where we were staying for long enough that I just felt so much shame and so much guilt, and fear for her also, of how she was going to be, how she was going to cope after we went our separate ways, and that we would be breaking up in the middle of nowhere, miles and hours from an airport, and how she gets the panic attacks. I just broke down and started crying and basically saying, look, maybe it is me, maybe it is my fault. I need to find help when I get home and understand why I can't marry you until these issues are sorted. I need to find out what's stopping me from moving forward. And then that was the trigger that made her obviously happy, and that she wasn't the problem, and that I was the problem, and I was admitting I was the problem. So then she basically made me call her sister to talk to her. So I called her sister, and I was like, okay, what do I say? Well, why am I calling her? And she said, well, tell her it was your fault. Tell her, that you are the one with the issues and that you're going to work on it when you get home. So that's what I said. To which her sister actually said, well, look, I think it comes on both sides. You both need to work it out together, and I'm really happy that you're finding a way to solve it. And if you can get through this, you can get through everything. Then we finished that. Then she made me call her therapist, and I spoke to her therapist, and her therapist basically said, look, and I said, look, it was my fault. I don't know how to deal with the relationship. Maybe I should come and see you when we come back and try and work out why I can't move forward and why I can't, marry her at this point. And she said, look, my only advice to you right now is if you agree to stay together, just forget about all these arguments. Just try and be happy with the last, week of the holiday, and we'll deal with everything when you get back. And then lastly, she made me call my mum and again tell her, that it was me that had the issues, etc. And she actually wrote down, my abuser actually wrote down exactly what I needed to say. And she gave it to me in the call, and I was just looking at it, and I just couldn't say it. It was just not me. It was not true. And so I said it, but in my own words, in a slightly different way that I felt comfortable to say. And when the call ended, she went crazy at me. She went mad at me. She was so angry at me. I was lying to my mum. My mum was like, is she there? And I said no, and she was. She was listening. I think it was even on speakerphone. So that was very difficult. So the first attempt basically failed, and just only made me sort of announce that I was the issue, that I was the problem, that I had caused this, and that I needed help when I got home. But the point of ending was really, let's just try and enjoy the last week and not talk about it, not focus on it, not deal with it. So that was the first attempt, and you can understand how I was still stuck in it, how I couldn't escape it. Even when she broke up with me, I felt that guilt, that shame that brought me right back into it again. And that's what she knew how to do. It's, when she used to pack her bags and leave here, she would stay around long enough for me to feel that emotion and the fear, etc., to then bring her back. And that's essentially what happened again. So now we move on to the second attempt. So the second attempt was actually 3 days later. We flew to Singapore. I remember being very upset with her because she was on her phone and talking to her friend, trying to help her friend through all these issues, psychological issues that her friend had, how she was so upset, depressed, and etc. And my abuser was basically trying to help her, and this is the first time they spoke in 4 months. And so she was giving all sorts of advice and caring and nurturing, etc. And I hated it. I didn't like it at all, because I was like, how can you be so nice and kind and thoughtful and helpful and caring and to this person, and you treat me like this? And it's funny because I never really understood that at the time. I just knew I was angry and upset, but I didn't know why. But that was the exact reason why. So I remember being upset with that situation of an hour and a half of that conversation as we were going through the airport and going into Singapore. So the next day she was upset with me again. I think it was to do with that I had been upset with her the day before. So she basically refused to go out anywhere. She stayed indoors, didn't want to do anything, told me go without me, playing the victim, isolating herself. Eventually she agreed to come out. So we went to Universal Studios, and that was actually probably the best thing that ever happened. because we went and saw everything. I didn't know it at the time, didn't realise, but everything was based in fear at Universal. You know, Shrek was being attacked by some ghost, or in Waterworld, the Mel Gibson character was being shot and chased and whatever else, and everything was all about fear. And Spielberg's Lights, Camera, Action was about an earthquake and fear. So this basically put her into a spiral, and we got to the Jurassic Park queue with the dinosaurs and things, and she couldn't take it. So she left and called her therapist and was on the call for 2 hours to her therapist. We then went home, and she basically said to me, Nick, we were in a hotel room. She said, Nick, she said, I've been speaking to my therapist. I can't let go of what happened 3 days ago. Her therapist says that if she's that unhappy with the relationship, and if I don't know what I want after 2 years, then we needed to end it. And for the first time, the door was open for me, and I was able to get out of it because I couldn't disagree with her. After 2 years, if you don't know that you want to be with me for the rest of your life, if everything was right now, then we need to end this. And I said, you're right. I can't. If everything is right now exactly as it is, I can't be with you. And we do need to end it. Now, the only difference with this to previous conversations was I no longer felt the shame. I no longer felt the fear. I no longer felt the guilt of leaving her in the middle of nowhere, of it being my fault. And I was so unhappy, and just, I don't know, it was just the perfect occasion, the perfect event, the perfect situation for me just to say, again, you're right. And actually in that moment, this spell lifted from me, and I realised that I'd become her and she had become her mother as a child. I was living her childhood of how her mother had been shown such hate and then love and hate and love, and that's what she was doing with me. And I just saw in that moment the whole pattern, the whole situation of what was going on, and I realised this is over, we're finished. My only responsibility now is to go home, and if she needs help getting home, I can help her, but this is over. So that was that moment. So the door was open for me to basically leave this relationship, this abusive relationship. We were at a place, unlike the last time that we broke up 3 days before, we were in a place where it was easy to get home, so I didn't feel that guilt or shame that I was leaving her in the middle of nowhere. She couldn't play the victim, that she was stuck in the middle of nowhere, and I would take the car. There were taxis everywhere. It was easier for her to get home. I'd also just given her some money before we went away, and I knew that she hadn't spent it because I paid for everything on the holiday. So I knew she had the money to get home as well. I also knew that we couldn't move forward until those issues were solved. I knew it would be a clean break. There were no issues with the flat. There would be no, she wouldn't, her being upset, angry, mad. I'd already experienced it 3 days before, so I knew what that might be or how that was. So I had experience now of that, and I was okay with that then. So I knew I could be okay with it here too. So that fear was removed at that point. And like I said, that spell had been lifted. I could clearly see exactly what was going on. And I also knew she would try and get me back. I knew straight away, and I called my family and told them we broke up. And the first thing they said is, she will come and try and get back together with you. And I said, I know. And so I basically left the room. I took my credit card, I took my passport, and I left her to pack. She wanted to be alone, to play the victim, to pack on her own. So she did that. And I just knew with my credit card and passport, she could take whatever else she wanted and I would be fine. And I waited, and eventually she left, and then she just walked off. I remember it. She just walked out without even looking, without seeing anything, just walked to the street and stood at the end of the street and just stayed there in view, almost so I would see her while she worked out what she was doing next. Again, waiting for me to feel that shame and that guilt and such everything else to come after her to try and convince her. But I wasn't going to do this time. I knew I was done. I was finished. And I knew I was going to just go home the next day. I was changing my flight. I was coming home. That was it. It was over. Took her about half an hour for her to get a taxi and go somewhere. And of course, then that phone call came. Nick, I left something up behind. Can I come and get it? And I was like, no, you let me know where you are and I will drop it to you. I don't want you here. I want to be able to escape you. To which point she said, she gave me the address, and then just as I was about to leave, she called me up and she said, look, I'm having a panic attack. I don't understand what's going on. Can I come back? I don't know how to, please don't let me be here on my own. And while many of you may think, don't do it, I was very clear in what I thought, and I was so strong in what I knew and felt. I said, look, no problem, come back, it's okay. And then when she came back, she tried again to say, look, I'm so sorry, let's try again, apologize. And I said, look, I'm sorry, but this is over. We're finished. I'm going home tomorrow. And you're welcome to join me, or you can stay in this hotel room, whatever you want to do. I'm going home tomorrow, it's over. And I don't know why, or I don't know why my fear disappeared, or that control, or I can only say it was like a spell. And she realised she didn't have that spell on me anymore. And she just, I suppose her tactics then changed to, okay, if I'm nice to him and good to him all the way home and not a pain in the neck or abusive towards him, maybe he'll change his mind, until we get there. And of course I never did. But for that moment I did feel free and clear, and I knew exactly what I wanted and nothing was going to stop me. That's essentially how we broke up. Now, if you're in this situation and you know that you want to break up with your abuser, and you find yourself in that shame, that guilt, and that fear, then playing the victim, all that manipulation, it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. It's not easy for me to recognize that I was in an abusive relationship. It was not easy to leave it. It had to be on holiday on my terms twice, and I somehow managed to find the key to that lock of her breaking up with me, because that was the only way I could end that relationship, was her breaking up with me. And maybe taking to Universal Studios put all those fears into her mind that made her do it. But ultimately I suppose it was my strength that said, I cannot continue this, or I cannot move forward unless these issues are solved. And that was the running theme all the way through my head for all of the 2 years. If you are in a difficult relationship, an abusive relationship, a relationship you don't want to be in, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, always ask yourself, if everything was to stay the same, would it be okay for you? Now, in an abusive relationship, even if you want to leave, it's impossible. I'm putting these videos. I don't really know the solution. I almost didn't find it myself. I can only explain how I did it. But if you can share the video, if you can tell everyone about abuse in men, maybe those men will understand that they're in abusive relationships. I think for me, understanding that it's fear, shame, guilt, victim, these 4 things, if I understood that, I think I would feel much stronger to leave. I would know that it was a spell, basically, and I would find it would help break that spell of knowing that pattern, of understanding that pattern, and forgetting about that they're such a great person, or how could I do this to them, all this rhetoric that you hear, that I heard all the time. I think by understanding those 4 things as being the things that lock you in, certainly the things that locked me in, may help you to have the strength to get out of it, and knowing that I was able to, but I was able to do it, and it wasn't as bad as I thought, and actually it wasn't anywhere near as bad as I thought. It was the perfect condition for me being on holiday, but I don't know if I'd be strong enough to do it at home, but it was all based on fear, on the fear that I had of breaking up, and I was empowered and had the strength to do it by understanding what was going on. And I really hope that this video will help you or others out there who may be going through the same thing to feel the strength to be able to get out of it as well. And that it's easier than you think, as hard as you think it is, as impossible as you think it is. It is much easier than you think, and you can do it. Thank you.